The average American home experienced more than 8 hours without power in 2020, which is more than twice what it was half a decade ago. That led one Bloomington resident to ask City Limits series why so many power lines are above ground, as electrical lines become increasingly vulnerable to storms and outages. Bente Bouthier has this report.
Lifelong Bloomington resident Justin Pope says he and his wife have been experiencing regular power outages since they bought their home in the Fritz Terrace neighborhood. They've lived there for 4 years with their 2 dogs and a lizard. Pope says this year they've been lucky and haven't had any outages, but is worried about when they could return and how frequent they've been in the past.
The past 3 years, 4 years, quite a bit. I'd say at the most, maybe the worst was like 10 a year. And they'd just be so sudden, and sometimes they'd be off for more than 12 hours, I'd say. Nothing longer than 24, but some pretty long ones.
He wonders what's leading to the power getting knocked out so easily in such localized areas.
Sometimes it'll just be a little bit of rain or a tiny wind gust, and it'll just be out, just completely out.
Pope does suspect that living in an older neighborhood with lots of vegetation does have something to do with it. According to the Institute of Electrical and Electronic Engineers, the duration of outages in Indiana increased from 2019 to 2020, but the average number of outages that occurred went down. These are tracked through standards that measure minutes and numbers of outages per customer. The average person lost power in 2020 for 294 minutes, more than the 266 in 2019. But the average number of outages occurring decreased to 1.31 in 2020 from 1.5 in 2019. Bruce Calloway is with Duke Energy. He says a majority of power outages are vegetation-related, like trees and branches interfering with lines and transformers. He adds that most power lines in the state are overhead rather than buried underground.
We often get the major causes of our outages are vegetation.
But in that case, why not just bury the power lines?
When we look at designing a line, we look to design it in the most cost-effective way because, these costs are borne by all our customers in the state. That's part of what goes into rates. So we want to do that in the most cost-effective manner.
Both he and Doug Childs, the executive director of the Utilities District of Western Indiana REMC, say burying the lines in southern Indiana is complicated by rocky soil, which Childs says can make installation of underground electric even more expensive. Childs says the only way to improve reliability and prevent outages is regular maintenance in areas with trees and updating infrastructure. His district is looking at ways of modernizing and updating their grid, which includes replacing old porcelain insulators with polymer. Childs adds older neighborhoods with aging infrastructure will tend to have more outages.
Most utilities in the country, whether they're investor-owned, municipals, REMCs, obviously we've got a tremendous amount of infrastructure that's getting older every year, so we've got a lot to do. So undergrounding being that costly, it comes down to how many miles can you do in a year.
Calloway says Duke Energy has also been working to modernize its grid, implementing smart systems that make it easier to detect issues when they occur. Childs and Calloway say in newer neighborhoods, more lines are buried, and this is often a cost developers choose to incur.
Our country needs to invest more money into its electric system, do a lot of replacement, a lot of upgrades. There's no cheap way around this. And that includes in doing more and more tree trimming.
Indiana ranked 18th in the nation for longest power outages in 2019. Maine was the worst, with outages lasting 18 hours on average. Pope just wants his power to stay on and is thinking about the ways it affects his family and others.
I have a lizard and I worry about that. If, the power goes out, it needs to stay 90 degrees in there for him to live, because if it goes below 60 or something, he can die. And I can't imagine, having a kid or having a kid that needs things hooked up and running at all times, or a family member that needs that.
For Indiana News Desk, I'm Bente Bouthier.